Well, you know, we say that Jesus is the master teacher of all time, but we have another master teacher walking on earth. And because of God and because of Dr. Ronnie, I am who I am. He taught me this teaching and how to live. And I know many of you, if not all of you, feel the same way, that when he opens his mouth, healing, knowledge, wisdom takes place. So without further ado, let's get some of that wisdom, knowledge, spiritual food today. Our Dr. Ronnie Jones.
Yes. Good morning, Third Church. Thank you, Janetta. Spirit of Kamala Harris this morning. That's what she said. We're not going back. I want you all to know you look good for 92. You're holding up well. You know, I enjoy this so much. This time is always sort of bittersweet for me because as I reflect back upon the wonderful, wonderful souls that I've met on this journey and to have experienced from each of them such a degree of unconditional love. It was just such a great, great experience. And you know, each year when we get to this moment, I'd like for us just to pause and to recognize all of those who came before us. Because of them, LA Third Church still exists. So I invite you just to pause with me for a moment as we take a moment. You know, there's so many other churches, especially New Thought churches or New Thought spiritual centers that have closed their doors, or they've merged with others because they've lost their memberships as those individuals have gone on to a higher realm. But today we want to pause for a moment and to honor those who kept the light shining, awaiting the reawakening of this church, and also for those who came after seeking the light and then moved on to that higher realm. The Bible instructs us that there are three that bear witness in the earth: the Spirit, the water, and the blood, and those three are one. So in this moment, what we're going to do is that we're going to offer a libation to our ancestors. Today, as I read each name, I'd like for you to listen and to bless them. And if I miss someone whom you are aware of that was a member of this community, when I pause, I want you to just speak their name into this moment. I'm reminded of a letter by Paul to the Corinthians when he said, "But we know now that Christ is risen from the dead and become the firstfruits of those who have died. For since by man came death, by man also comes the resurrection of the dead." And he concluded it by saying, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" So today we honor these following individuals: Milton Rice, Fannie Hamilton, Valita Stevens, Addie Austin, Rabina Bly Williams, Rose Moulton, Doris Smith, Dorothy Craddock, Myron Mack, Alicia Pope, Ron Bishop, Barbara Morrison, Betty Gantz, Annie Haggerty, Clarence McCrae, Jim Hunter, Collins Beverly, Virginia Mitchell, Barbara Walker, Alice Irving, Rauf Iskander, Frank Koji, Violet Koji, Alberta Moore, Roberta Reddick, Dr. Geneva Williams, Verbal Shepherd, Jack Shepherd, Austin Moore, Elaine Pounds, Nelson Atkins, Ernestine Bannerese, Dorothy Dupree, Leon Patterson, Nina Mills, Gerald Lassar, Joel Patterson, Vitra Perry, Rosa Stallworth, Jean Taylor, Pearline Walker, Rainer Mann, Julia White, John Williams, Betty Ball, Maud Young, Calvin Irving, Bert Hicks, Bernadette Wilson, Regina Greer, Virgie Wimberly, James Moran, Bertie Glover, and Nathaniel White Jr. Are there others? So we are thankful for all of these, those who are identified and those who are not, all who are part of this wonderful spiritual community. So won't you just join with me and let's give them a hand. Thank you, Charles. 92 wonderful years, and this topic, I believe, therefore, I speak. The scripture I'd like to share today is found in the book of Jeremiah. And this is a scripture that has come to me from the moment I saw the theme that Reverend Lisa had created for this month. And for the entire month, it has just sort of resonated into my consciousness. And it goes, moreover, the word of the Lord came to me saying, Jeremiah, what do you see? And I said, I see a rod of an almond tree. And then the Lord said to me, you have seen well, for I will hasten my word to perform it. On the first Sunday, Reverend Lisa gave you the summary of the first years all the way up until the period of 1986. She told you about the church's evolution up to that moment. It was, of course, in 1986 that I received an invitation from a very good friend of mine, someone who was in a class behind me at the Institute of Religious Science. And he told me that he was going to be speaking at a church on the East Side, the Los Angeles Third Church of Religious Science. And he invited me to come and to be a part of that experience on that day. And I said to him, when he said it to me, I said, there is a church on the East Side? I said, I was not aware of it. I said, but sure, I'll join you there. So that morning I drove over, got there early, parked my car, and then I walked into the building. When I walked into the building that Sunday morning, I had, for me, which was a life-altering experience. There were two wonderful people standing there, Milton Rice and Fannie Hamilton. They were the greeters on charge that day. So as I entered the door, they gave me a program. Wonderful smile, just a very warm welcome. And as I took that program and as I stepped into the sanctuary, the Spirit spoke to me and said, "This is the place that I prepared for you. This is the place that I prepared for you." Now, the very last thing on my mind was to be the pastor. And the very last thing on my mind was to be the pastor over there. That was not a part of the program that day. You know, I was really enjoying myself attending the Redondo Beach Church of Religious Science, enjoying Dr. Richelieu and that program every Sunday morning. And so I paused to go over here. Now, there were some other things that were going on for me at that time. I had just started a brand new business. I had just bought a new house. I had just bought a new car. My plate was full, and so the last thing I was thinking about was being a pastor of a church. But you know, one of the things that has sort of been my guiding North Star my entire life was to acknowledge the presence of God in my life. And when I heard the Spirit spoke to me, and it was just so clear, I just sort of pondered to myself, and I just walked on in and sat down and took a seat. And as I took a seat, I began to look around. And as I looked around, I started to say, "God, are you sure?" Because this building was in the worst shape that you could have ever imagined. I kept thinking to myself as I would look up at the ceiling, if we just have a gentle tremor, this ceiling is coming down. Because it looked like every Band-Aid that they could find, they had put it up there against those tiles to hold them in place. So once again, I'm just questioning this in my mind. I'm not saying anything. I'm listening to the service and listening to my friend as he speaks, and I'm just saying, is this right that you want me to be the pastor here? But you know, the scripture says that whenever the Spirit would speak, it would confirm it with a sign and a wonder. And at the end of the service, that same usher that gave me the program walked over to me and he said, "Sir, are you a minister?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I felt it as you walked in the door." He said, "I believe that God has sent you here with a message for us." Speaking of confirmation, you know, as I began to reflect back on that, I thought about that instance when Jesus was talking to Peter, and he asked him, "Who do men say that I am?" And so Peter began to tell him, "Well, they say that you are one of the disciples, you're John the Baptist reincarnated, you're one of the prophets." He began to identify all these people who they said Jesus was, but Jesus said to him, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus turned to him and said, "Listen, Peter, flesh and blood did not reveal that to you." In other words, you didn't read that, and you didn't hear that from someone outside of yourself. But you heard it through the revelation of Spirit speaking through you. God speaking directly to you told you who I am. He said, "Upon this rock," in other words, it is upon this understanding that I will build my church. And the reference was not about a structure with four walls and a roof. The church was about the understanding of God being incarnated within man, and man being able to identify the relationship with Spirit. So each and every time that we hear the voice within us, we can be certain that that is God speaking through us in a very special way. So that was my experience that day. So then Milton said something else to me. He said, you know, I'd like to introduce you to the people who make the decisions around here. So he took me up and introduced me to the late Alicia Pope. Alicia at that time was the president of the board of trustees for the church. He took me and he introduced us together, and she said, wonderful, can you come and speak for us next Sunday? So I told her I would. I left church that day and I called some friends of mine and I said, you know, on next Sunday I'm going to be speaking at this church on the east side. I'd like for you guys to come over and to be a part of that experience. Didn't share with them anything of what I had heard through Spirit, or what I had felt, or the confirmation that I had gotten from that usher. I was still seeking further confirmation because I just couldn't believe that the Spirit wanted me in that place. Like, it was absolutely looked like a building that was about to collapse. So a bunch of friends came the following Sunday. And one in particular, this friend of mine who was, she was just a wonderful, wonderful, very gifted clairvoyant. I wanted to make sure she was there. And once again, I said nothing to anyone. We had a wonderful service that Sunday. And at the end of the service, as I walked down out of the pulpit, all I could hear is, you are right for this place. As you were speaking, I just saw you here, that you are going to take over this pulpit. So I said, okay. So I spoke a couple other times there, and then I went away, and they asked me again. I said, well, no, I'm really kind of busy. A couple of months later, the church made a call, and they said that, you know, there are 3 ministers that we want to consider to come on as our new minister. Reverend O.C. Smith, Reverend J.L. Armstrong, and yourself. I said, okay. That's wonderful. I'm thinking, well, maybe O.C. will take the church, or maybe Reverend J.L. Well, as it would happen, Reverend O.C. Smith flat out denied it, and he told them that he didn't think his car would drive over there. Reverend J.L. said no. At this point, he was furthering his study at First AME, and he was satisfied being there. And so, Dr. Ronnie, what about you? I said, one of the things I've always been is spiritual. And when the Spirit directs me to go and to do something, I heed that direction, because I've always found out that there was something good and extraordinary that would happen when we obey Spirit. You know, so often things happen in our lives and we'll say, you know, my first mind said to do this and I didn't do that. And because of my failure to do that, this is what happened to me. Oftentimes, you know, we find ourselves praying and treating and asking Spirit for things, and when they all of a sudden manifest, and we're not really to accept it because we don't believe it being possible. But listen to our theme today. I believe, therefore I speak. So I accepted the call. I accepted the post as the new senior minister here at the church. And as I looked around the church, I said, you know, it's going to take something super extraordinary to happen here to draw other people into this location. You know, we're at 48th and Main. That once upon a time was a thriving black middle class of Los Angeles. But those days had been gone. African Americans had moved west, further west. And that was more of a migrant community, pretty much, except for a lot of African-American seniors who were still living there, individuals who had bought their homes there, paid those homes off, and had retired and were living there. And a lot of them were the membership of the church. So we're going to have to do something. We're going to have to raise money We're going to have to fix this place up. And I said, you know, it's going to take an extraordinary ministry in order for it to work here. You know, and coming out of a church where music was an integral part of the worship, and then being a part of other churches where music was a very instrumental part of that entire worship experience, I knew that we needed some music here at this church. Now, there was a wonderful organist that was there when I got there. He was probably in his late 80s, early 90s, sitting there playing this little organ. And when the congregation would sing, they would all stand up and open up the little hymnals, and they would begin to sing. And I said, well, that was the kind of worship that we had a long time ago. We don't kind of do that anymore. And so you needed really good music to have a draw. So what I would do is, I believe in prayer and I believe in visioning. So after service, when everyone was ready, had gone out of the church, I would sit there in the sanctuary, looking at the piano, and begin just to speak a word. The church had this beautiful black lacquer baby grand piano that was there, and they had a little organ that was there. Those were the instruments. They didn't have a regular soloist. So I asked my very good friend, Linda Alvarez, if she would take on that role to begin singing at the church, and she did. She was our soloist every single Sunday. But then I also would notice that there was a struggle with the music soloist. She was singing one thing and he was playing another. And I said, okay, we're going to have to heal this. So I invited some other practitioners, friends of mine who were over at Guidance, to join me and to speak in a word that the perfect musician would be led to our church, someone that would assist in moving this church forward, someone that would be able to assist in creating a draw, someone that could assist us in creating the funds to repair the building. Well, after a month or so of doing that prayer treatment, I got a call one day from Jean Alexander over at Guidance, and she said to me, she said, Dr. Ronnie, I got the perfect musician for you. I said, who's that? She said, his name is Ron Bishop. I said, okay. I said, well, give me his number so I can give him a call and set up an appointment. She gave me Ron's number. I called him. We set up an appointment for an interview. Ron came over and he just absolutely, well, you know what he did. He made that piano sing. Just an extraordinary talent, totally extraordinary talent. So after he got through and we talked about how much money it would cost for him to be our regular pianist on Sunday mornings, and he told me. And I thought to myself, so well, we're struggling as it is. When I came to the church, I think they had on a monthly basis maybe $300 in their checking account. So you know about how far and how much that was going to do. But I knew that we needed to have the music in order for us to draw younger people in, as well as to draw back those individuals who had left the church. See, just prior to my coming to LA 3rd, there was a major fallout with the minister who was there at that time, Reverend Lee Gomez. And I don't know what happened. I never wanted to get into the details, but I know that because of that, it split the church, and a lot of people had left. And then they were gradually starting to come back as they heard that there was a new minister in town. So I went to our board and I said, this is how much Ron wants, and I know that we're not going to be able to do that. So I said, so let's do this. Whatever it was that you were planning on paying me, let's pay him. And then once our church has grown, then we'll revisit the church's ability to pay me. And they agreed to that. And we brought Ron in. And in addition to Ron coming in, then there were some other members that came in, friends of mine. Several of them have gone on. Raouf Iskander, who at that time was the lead architect for the theme park in Osaka, Japan for Walt Disney, good friend, he came in and he designed the interior of the church and became a member of our board of trustees. James Shields at that time, who was the vice president with Computer Sciences Corporation down in El Segundo, he also became a member of church to organize the church records. And then we decided that in order to raise money, we would create sidewalk sales. And that was the brainchild of Carrie Elam. And every Saturday morning, Carrie would have a sidewalk sale right there at 48th and Main. The members would all just go into their homes and pull out everything that they wanted to sell, and we would sell out. We were blessed to raise enough money to remodel the sanctuary. We were blessed enough money to remodel the restrooms, and we made the church beautiful. We didn't get to the fellowship hall, and the fellowship hall was almost the size of this room. And it needed work as well, but we were working on that. We had now wonderful music. You know, on any Sunday morning, you never knew exactly what you were going to come in there and hear. Because Ron was such a gifted musician, and also he just had a truckload of friends who would love to appear at church on Sunday morning. Some Sunday mornings it was he alone, and some Sunday mornings we had a full accompaniment, acoustical, bass guitar, saxophone, piano, and organ, and soloists, and it was all going on right there at 48th and Main. And everyone loved it. And then we were there just for a while, and we decided that we were going to have to leave because we were constantly being graffitied all over the building, and people were breaking in. And that was my first experience of somebody breaking into a church. I said, what were they coming to get? The books or the magazines? But they were breaking in. And they were stealing china and glassware and all that. And I said to the church one Sunday morning, I said, God is trying to tell us something. So we leased the building out. We leased it to another church. And then we moved over to the University Hilton at USC. And we had services over there for maybe a year before one day, right here on the corner of 11th Avenue and Lamert Boulevard, Tyree Hunter and myself were standing out there after a board meeting of a nonprofit that we were on. And I looked across the street and I said, Tyree, that building over there has a for lease sign on it. I'm going to inquire about that to see if we can get that building. I called that owner. We cut a deal. We left that hotel, went over here on 11th Avenue, around the other side of the pizza building there. And we stayed there with a very active building fund. As we were there, more and more people began to come to the church, and it began to grow. And then we began, as our building fund began to grow, we started scouring Lamert Park, because this is the community we wanted to be in. And we were looking after building after building after building, trying to find one that we could acquire. One day, another practitioner friend of mine called me, who was a real estate broker. He says, I found a building for you. He says, it's right across the street from you. And I said, impossible. We have scoured everything in this community and have not found anything. He says, it doesn't have a sign. That's why you didn't see it. He pointed out this building, met with the owner. We cut a deal, took it to our board. The board approved it, brought our ministerial class here before we closed the deal to have them pray on this deal that it would be accepted. He accepted our offer, and we closed this property in less than 30 days. Listening to Spirit, I believe, therefore I speak. You know, I was listening to a song the other day, and it kind of summed up for me this feeling of believing before one speaks. And I'm sure you're familiar with it. The title of the tune is I Believe. And it goes like this: I believe in the power, and I'll never doubt, every minute, every hour, I believe. I believe in myself because I know I got help. From the power in the sky, I believe. No need asking where I've been, just ask me where I'm going. Because I won't be ashamed to tell you I live my life knowing. All roads ahead of me are filled with peace and love. Every step so heavenly, you'll fall and bounce right up. All miracles and dreams are realized for me through faith. Nothing seems impossible if you believe. How powerful are those lyrics? If you believe. And you know, I also need to pause to acknowledge the longest serving assistant pastor of Los Angeles Third Church of Religious Science. And that was Dr. Carl Hallquist, known as Reverend Carl. Reverend Carl was at LA Third when I arrived. He was there, and he was part of the ministerial staff at that time. And he stayed a very active and committed person in this church until he retired. Reverend Carl at that time was also an engineer at Rockwell International, and while he was serving as the role of the assistant pastor. And you know, Dr. Carl is just one of those brilliant minds, because after he retired, he went and got another PhD and then 2 additional master degrees. And he retired to teach graduate students in engineering and math and quantitative analysis. And Reverend Carl, if you are listening, if you're online today, blessings to you, and we are so grateful for your contribution to LA Third. What were we other than a wonderful flower blooming in the desert? An opportunity for greatness, an opportunity on the east side of Los Angeles to be a light, a beacon light, a light that was beckoning any and all students who were willing to come and to be a part of a wonderful creative experience. Well, for the long time, we kept saying that we were the best kept secret in town. And we were, because each time someone would come and visit us, they would say, I didn't know the church existed. But they were happy that they came. And so we came into this property here, and we had spent all of our money to purchase the property. And once we got in here, it needed a lot of work. This was a hair factory. It once upon a time was a beauty parlor. Back in the days, you know, when they had everything connected in the floor, because in this room here, I guess there were a bunch of those hair dryers that went across here because the infrastructure was still in the floor. On the other side, they were manufacturing hair color and hair and everything else. And then they were doing something else with it upstairs. And they had a little church that was in here at the time that they were having their, I guess, their worship. So when I met with the owner, he thought that they were going to be able to stay, and he was quite surprised that we closed so quickly. So I brought our class up in here one night after we had closed, and I said, okay, now we're going to have to speak another word, believing that we can manifest a facility here that is comfortable and that is worthy of our worship experience. And you know, for so long, at least I thought that we had a congregation of a lot of retirees, individuals who are living on fixed incomes, and maybe they were sort of struggling. But I tell you, those loved ones, the moment I said that we need, they dug down deep, and we did not have to borrow to fix this place up. We raised the dollars in our congregation. We completed this place, and it was filled with chairs because we weren't that large of a congregation at that time. So I asked the class one day, I said, let us walk around from chair to chair and speak to that chair in anticipation of someone coming to fill it. And that's what we did. We did that. And those of you who have been here for a while can reflect back to the time when we had overflow 2 services every Sunday morning. There was not an empty seat, and people were rushing to get here to make sure that they could get a seat because they were trying to avoid being in the kitchen. That was the experience. That was the evolution of this church. Now, as the church grew, we began to burst at the seams. The mortgage, we paid it off, and we still had money to spare. But then after 25 years at the helm, the same spirit that spoke to me and said, this is the place I prepared for you, said to me, now it's time to turn it over. So it was time now to pass the torch, and pass the torch to one who had been a member of this congregation ever since she was old enough to know what church was. Her grandmother had brought her here ever since she was a child. And from the time that I came in and began to offer the classes, one, Science of Mind 1 and 2, and then Ministerial 1 and 2. She took all of that. And then she served on the board of trustees, both as the treasurer and also as the president. She's worked in the church as the janitor, cleaning it up. Very committed student. The Spirit led me to pass the torch to our own Reverend Lisa Meggs. But when I passed the torch, I passed 2 torches. Because not only did we have a need for one to be the ecclesiastical director of the church had also created a nonprofit economic development corporation. And we had been giving out scholarships. We had been having empowerment seminars for the businesses in this community, and with great plans to do a bunch of other things. And so once again, I asked Spirit, who would be the perfect person in our church? Because it needed to be someone in the church, because the nonprofit was an extension of LA Third. The Spirit told me, give it to Reverend Gerald. Handed Reverend Gerald the realm of Parkside EDC, and he has taken it to an entirely greater dimension. Give Reverend Gerald a hand. All of this is this wonderful legacy for this church. But there's a question now we must ask ourselves. We made it this far, 92 years. For it to go further than that, it's going to require you. It's going to require you to believe, and then you speak. It's going to require you to believe that your word has power. It's going to require you to understand that right where you are, God is, and that God is empowering you. And it has to be something not just that you say, but that you absolutely believe and accept. Each of us must be like Jeremiah, because oftentimes I believe the Spirit is asking us, what is it that we see? And we are afraid to identify what we see because we don't think we're worthy to receive the benefit of vision. And I'm not talking about the things that we see with our natural eye. I'm talking about the things that appear to us with our spiritual eye. Where do you see yourself going? And if you don't see yourself going anyplace, you will not go anyplace. Oftentimes, we will come to a moment where someone has crossed over and we'll say, well, they left so soon. But did you ever maybe just begin to ponder and think to yourself that maybe they never had a vision beyond where they were? They never thought about advancing beyond the moment. So often we'll complain about our advancement in life and that we're not acquiring all the things that we would like to acquire. We're not moving further along as we would like to, and we wonder why. We look at everyone and everything else around us, and we see everything in an upward spiral except ourselves. So why am I being punished? Well, think this. If there is a punishment, it's one that you've given yourself, because you have a failure to look beyond the moment. You have a failure really to trust God. You know, in every conversation we say that we believe God and we say that we trust God, but when we are in the midst of a challenge, in those instances where we need to trust Spirit the most, that's when we retreat. That's when we run. It's as though we've never understood or received the teachings of truth. As I say to you so often, the only thing in front of all of us is opportunity, and that's all it will ever be unless you decide to do something with it. You are face to face every day with your potential. And see, a lot of us are afraid to seize our potential and to do something with it. When I came to this church back in 1986, I was then starting a brand new company. And that company still exists today. When I left the full-time ministry here that allowed me to go and be full-time there as opposed to burning a candle at both ends and wearing myself down somewhere in the middle. But because both takes an awful lot of energy and they both take a lot of your attention. But see, when we can really speak, as someone said one day in the scripture, I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. That allows us to know that the only limitations that we have are those that we set for ourselves. You're only limited in this experience that you call your life based on the limitations that you yourself have put in place. And the moment that you get tired of being limited, you will say to yourself, with all the faith that you have, that I am moving off this mountain. I am moving beyond this moment because God has prepared a greater experience for me. But see, you can only say that if you believe it. Because if you don't believe it, it's just a word that is going nowhere. But when you look at your circumstance and you decide that this is the day that I'm going to change everything, regardless of what's happening, regardless of how old I am, regardless of what color I am, regardless of what sex I am, there is unlimited possibility for me. And I'm going to do just that. I believe that same word that came to Jeremiah is that same word that's coming to me. That the Spirit is calling each of us by our name and saying, what is it that you see? So just think on that for a moment. Spirit asking you, what is it that you see? And hopefully you see something more than the chair in front of you. That what you see is your life as you would like for it to expand. You see the good that you would like to experience coming towards you. And then you can believe that it is rightfully yours. That by divine right, you have the opportunity to reach into the unseen and the unknown and grab something that has your name attached to it. For the next 92 years, we should be ready to create something wonderful that's called the LA Third Church of Religious Science, or you've changed their name since I left to Los Angeles Third Church for Spiritual Living. But even it as an idea, how does it progress from this moment unless we all do something? I was reflecting the other day and I said, you know, other than the children, I can't recall one fundraiser that our church has had. The kids are having fundraisers because they have a vision, they have a purpose, they want to do something. But what about the older folk? See, the Bible is clear. Without a vision, the people perish. Without a vision, the church will perish. Without a vision, there is greatness that is left on the table. You know, we need to pull ourselves up. You know, we like to talk a lot. It's time to do a lot. Yes. Look at the example of Parkside. They're having events. And, you know, the little scholarships that we used to give out long ago is nothing compared to the ones that they're giving out now. And then there are legacies that are being created by individuals that believe that they have something to give. You know, one of the things that have kept most of our churches, the older religious science churches, going are legacies that individuals have left, individuals that had created substance, individuals that believed that they were capable, individuals that lived their dreams. And as a result of living their dreams, they had something to give back. We should ask ourselves, each one of us, what about me? What about me? Is, out of all the people that are in here today, am I to believe that there are no ideas? Out of all the people that are in here, are there no ideas? Because if there are none, this is going to come to a screaming halt. You know, when I came to LA Third, there were a bunch of seniors that were committed. And they were doing the best they can, and they were holding on. They were taking turns speaking every Sunday morning to make sure that there was somebody there to give a message. Why? Because they believed. They were in prayer that God would send them someone to take them from where they were to where they wanted to go. And then when I came in, what did they do? They rallied behind me. What do we need to do? We need to rally behind Reverend Lisa. You know, so often we want to wait for the minister to have all the ideas and then complain. See, that will never get us anywhere. There are good ideas, and then there may be ideas that are not so good, but we won't know what the ideas are until we put them all out there. And that should be our responsibility. I believe, therefore I speak. One day, I was laid off from a job, but I believed that I could start a business. So I went out and celebrated being laid off, and the next day I started a business. And this is 35 years ago. And since the start of that, we have worked in at least building in 5 states in the United States and continuing to grow. We started with 2 people and expanded to 30. Because it was an idea believed in. It was a vision that was believed could be possible. And as the scripture said, God has no respecter of persons. In other words, it don't just give the one and say, you're my favorite, I'm not going to give to anyone else. Everybody has equal access. Everybody has equal access to spirit. It's just that a lot of people are not willing to use the access that they have. What about you? I believe, therefore I speak. You know, one of the greatest things, the greatest experiences I've had was being at this pulpit. Because on each Sunday morning that I would come and I would share with you, I would be sharing with me. Because on Saturdays, I have laid out a lesson. I have put it all together. But on Sunday morning, when I'd walk into the sanctuary and I aligned myself with the great I am, that I am, it would then bring me a greater realization, something else to share. And as I'm sharing it with you, I'm sharing it with me. Those affirmations that I would give you, I'd be giving them to myself. The difference is I believe them and continue to put them in motion, and therefore receive the result of those words that were spoken. What about you? Just like Spirit gives me one, He can give you one. Just like Spirit feeds me, Spirit feeds you. But see, it is, as Dr. Ernest Holmes says, our belief that sets the limit to a principle that is without limitation. Our belief. What do you believe? All of us say, you know, I believe God. I trust in God. Then what is your testimony? There has to be a testimony. Something great has to come through you. When you are aligned with the only power and presence that there is, when the life within you is the life of God expressing itself through means of you, something extraordinary needs to happen in your circumstance. A change needs to take place. And you can say it's that song, I believe. I invite you all to go out of here today. Go out of here today with a new commitment. Go out of here today with a real belief. Go out of here today with a greater understanding of the unity of yourself and spirit and the possibilities that exist within that unity. Go out of here today willing to bless yourself and to bless your circumstance. Go out of here today willing to say everything that has limited you in the past, that it has no power other than the power that you give it, and today you decide to no longer give it power. That every word, every ill thing that's ever been spoken out of your mouth, say to yourself that I take it back. Every harsh thing that I've ever said against anyone else, I take it back. I forgive me, and therefore I forgive everyone else that is around me. And then watch how your greatness then begin to flow. Stand ready to receive unexpected good. Peace and blessings to you today. Thank you.
We won't go back. Let's give Dr. Ronnie some more love.